Right, good morning everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'll just quickly pop myself up on the screen. Hopefully you can see me there for a second while my camera kicks in. But my name is Rogan Morrison, and together with Jaden, we're going to be taking you through this really informative webinar and just taking you through the relevance of audits and how they apply to organizations. So I'm going to close off my camera now and maybe just give you a little bit of introduction. Just a bit of, oops, sorry, stop sharing my screen there, wrong button. But really, I look after the delivery and sales aspect in voquzlabs for Africa, Middle East, and UKI, and it's great to have you, and thank you for attending this webinar this morning. A little bit about yourself, Jaden. Maybe you can just give me a quick introduction, and then we'll kick off into the slides.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jaden. I'm actually with the VOQUZ and also I'm covering the sales for Asia Pacific region. And I welcome everyone to this webinar on the Brace for Impact on SAP Audit. So good to start with this session with everyone.
Excellent, thanks, Jaden. And yes, absolutely. We're gonna kick off shortly. Just some housekeeping. There is a place for you to put in your questions. If you do have questions, we will try and get to these during the course of the actual webinar itself. But if we don't get to them, please also note we do answer some of these questions afterwards as well and reach out to you directly. So please feel free to ask us questions. We do have some polls also that we're going to be running during the course of the webinar. Please fill those in for us. And we have a survey at the end of the webinar. And we also have our details at the end of the webinar if you need to reach out to us. And I think really what's important as we jump into the session, we're in Q3 of this year. And I think for most organizations, they get to a point where they're coming too close to their audit time. Some of our customers have already received audit letters from SAP. And I think this is such an important topic as we get into a position to prepare for audits. And that's really the principle of this. This is an instructive webinar. We want to help organizations really get the most out of their interaction with SAP financially, and auditing is a crucial part of that. So let's jump on in and let's jump into the slides itself here. So pretty much what we're going to go through from an agenda today is we're going to just do an introduction, which we've pretty much done, the typical audit process. What do you need to go through when you go through that process, the audit preparations? We've got some licensing summary context as well, audits in practice, some details around that. And really what we're going to do is expound that information, bring it out into more detail to help you understand and get a better picture for how you actually manage your audit process. We've also got a whole lot of slides in an addendum that give you detailed audit preparation steps, and we're going to load these slides onto our website, so have a look at them. You can download them, and this is really what's going to help us together with you to get through the audit process as smoothly and as efficiently as possible. So just a little bit of introduction to audit. So what's not obvious on the slides is that, if you look at it from a company perspective, if you're on a company perspective side, you need to be continually obliged to comply with your license, your software that you're using based on the vendor that is providing that to you. And SAP is one of the vendors. In most organizations, those that have SAP, it can be their biggest ERP vendor. In some other organizations, it can be a small portion or a medium portion, but irrespective, you have to be compliant to the usage of their software. So this is a results in audits. They go hand in hand. And the outcome of this is that in what we've seen in most organizations over a period of time, is that at the end of every audit, they have to buy additional licenses at significant additional cost. And this is not something that's always budgeted for. So it's not an easy or pleasant experience because customers are not budgeting for it. And there's additional costs that they haven't got in their budgets. And so they need to go about a process financially to go and get this additional money to buy additional licenses. And this doesn't generate, this generates revenue for the vendor, but not necessarily value for the customer. And we'll have a look at why this is later on in the slide deck and why that's important to understand the outcomes for you as a customer versus the vendor side of things. And then secondly, there is financial risk associated with being audited. Okay, so it's very important from a contractual perspective. The line item pricing is not always easy to quantify. And this is really important. So your contracts may have variations within them, and those variations from a metric perspective is not necessarily aligned even within the SAP audit process structures and within the quantification there. So when you want to fill in a self-declaration, sometimes the metric that you're using is not aligned to the price list or the line item price, and then you've got to fill it in differently, etc. So very difficult when those things occur and we have these anomalies within the contract structure. Okay, so diffuse license metrics and even functionality is difficult to manage for the products that you're being audited for. So not everything, and you'll see this even on the SAP websites, not everything can be measured even with the SAP licensing measurement processes. So this is really challenging, and so therefore your compliance is not necessarily guaranteed. Okay, and then lastly, if you've bought SAP software, so we find a lot of customers are in a position where they've got the shelfware because of the fact that they have been told to buy a certain set of software that meets their needs, but when you buy it, it doesn't actually meet the full requirements, and therefore it ends up becoming a set of shelfware, and then you actually still charge maintenance for that shelfware. So this applies to NetWeaver for third-party applications. We've got very challenging areas around indirect and digital access, and then to Open Hub. The coverage of these different products in this suite area here are challenged for most organizations. So just as an introduction, we just wanted to cover those as the main points behind some of the challenges that organizations face when managing their audits. So let's go jump into a typical audit process. I think for those of you who have run through audit processes, this is quite a standard process, and I'm sure you should be well aware of it. But let's point out some specific things that may be of interest and maybe help to determine this. First of all, there are two different types of license audits that one can receive from SAP, and I think it's important to understand that. This is not something that you normally start initiating on your own. Normally, SAP will start with this and either an annual license audit or an enhanced license audit. And let's look at the difference between the two of these. You'll see immediately on the left-hand side that this requires self-declaration and system measurement. In terms of the annual license audit, it normally occurs annually. And what you'll see is that it's normally, as you said earlier, this self-declaration of usage by yourself as the organization. This is the most standard type of audit that most organizations receive. So it's not something that you can't do on your own. It's pretty simplistic. It's also based on the own license configurations. What does that mean when you say based on your own licensee's own configurations? In most cases, this refers to the user and usage-based allocation that you make in SU01 across all the different systems, your prod and dev systems that your end users are using, and you're allocating them a specific usage configuration. That's important to note. We'll touch on that a little bit later. It is limited in scope, so of course there's only a subset of the scope that's normally covered. It doesn't cover all the additional scope. SAP have no system access, so they don't actually go into your systems and start drilling down and asking for information specifically from your systems. You're actually controlling the entire audit, and there's no deep dive analysis. So these are some of the standard elements, and it's really the basic indirect access data is shared from an indirect digital access measurement context. Okay, so that's important to note. In comparison to an enhanced license audit, this really occurs from a notice perspective that SAP will send you something very specific and indicate in that email or in that communication that this is an enhanced license audit. So that's important to note. It is very much triggered and run by the vendor itself. So in this case, SAP really comes in and does a deep dive of the audit from a software usage perspective. It also involves specific auditors' inspections of the configurations that you've made in the system. So again, a deep dive occurs mostly in an enhanced audit, license audit. All products are included in the scope. So they literally go from end to end across your entire contracted landscape and look at across that entire element and add that into scope. What's important in that is to look at the measurement elements of that scope, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as we go through the presentation. So SAP normally will request some system access to perform the audit. We often suggest to customers in this context that you should maintain your access and let SAP look over your shoulders or ask for a specific set of information that you can provide, and if necessary, steps to provide that information, but also to determine what the outcome of that information will be so that you understand why SAP is looking for that information. Very important not to just accept the bona fide request from SAP, but to really analyze it and to determine what is going to be the outcome of them asking for this information, because this is important for you to compare then against the contract that you have with SAP. Okay. It's also going to involve the analysis of assigned authorizations. So who's been assigned what authorization profiles, etc. in the organization. It can also involve a full review of indirect access and digital access. So SAP may start asking for this, and we see that this is probably one of the most important areas, especially in certain types of customers, that this requirement may come out, and it's very important to start dealing with indirect and digital access. Okay, so just as an example of a measurement plan request, you will see here that you will receive an email, and in that email you receive a specific set of documentation. For those of you who have not received this before or are new to audits, this is the type of information you need to look for. So you'll see in there that what SAP does is provide you a whole lot of attachments that they request for you to complete. I know that SAP is moving more towards the SAP for Me platform and moving away from Louis and Looper. So on the SAP for Me platform, there are approaches that you can take as the organization to start uploading and gathering information, and also changing and adjusting the measurement plan. And this is really important, because what you may find is that within your measurement plan, you have certain products that you are no longer using. And so what SAP sees when they send this to you from a measurement plan, from an audit request perspective, is they see what's in your system using the SAP for Me based on the contract, but you may not be using certain of those products anymore. You may have deactivated them. You may have had negotiations with SAP where you are, you've exchanged certain things, but they're not actively changed and accurately reflected on the measurement plan. And this is really, really important. The scope of your audit is based on the measurement plan. So if your scope is inaccurate, you need to rectify this. You need to go into the measurement plan. You need to check it out. You need to go onto the systems on the SAP support portal and go and update the systems that you have so that the measurement plan is accurate for which the audit is requesting. Okay, very important to do that, and we can assist organizations with making sure that that is accurate in that context. So very important, look at the measurement plan. It is the scope on which the audit is based. And it's important to get your scope right. If your scope is incorrect, you're going to be providing information that is unnecessary, that may lead you into non-compliance or into financial risk. Be aware of your scope. Make sure that you are accurately understanding why you're filling these in from a scoping perspective. Okay. In terms of an enhanced license audit, you will see that we've explained a little bit of this beforehand, but there is a detailed document available from the SAP support portal in terms of the license audit itself. And you will see that it covers a lot more information. So it covers an update of the measurement plan, the business objects, if you're running business objects using the LMBI report, elements of your database in terms of the HANA Enterprise Edition, the Runtime Edition, the core worksheet for processes. So again, a lot more detail across the different license metrics is what SAP are going to start looking for. So when we talk about licensing, there are 4 pillars of licensing at the moment on the on-prem side. Those are users, engines, your digital access or your indirect access, and your database. And so from an enhanced license audit, SAP are going to take a look at all 4 of those pillars and the contract that underlines that, and go and determine, is your usage accurate against that contract? Okay, where are you at with that? So you can see here that there's a lot more information. Business process diagrams are asked for. What are the entities using SAP if you have multiple entities? This is really a deep dive into your usage of the SAP system against the contract. So please be aware of that. I do see some questions coming through in the questions chat. I'll get to them shortly. So we just want to close out a few things here, and then we might jump into some questions. But before we jump into questions and things like that and into the polls, I just want to go through the standard annual audit lifecycle. And this is for organizations that have been running SAP for a long time. And I'm sure if you actually look at the contractual elements and the order forms that you have in your organization, this is a very common picture. So you start with an initial investment of SAP at a certain point in time where you buy a certain product set to meet a certain set of functional requirements. Okay, and on a yearly basis, you have this audit that takes place. So in first year, you have audit 1, and out of this audit process came an order form. In most cases, SAP required you to true up your licenses. They found a deficit, and you needed to purchase more licenses. And this is primarily from 2 reasons. One, the company can be growing, but also they have additional requirements ongoing, and they see that, and so they bundle their order with additional requirements. And that's quite common. And over time, what happens is you have audits and order forms and audits and order forms and audits and order forms. And we see this across when we do a detailed effective license position for organizations. We often find that straight after an audit, there's an order form that trues up that license. Okay. And this process is very common. Okay, so customers are annually audited, they do the self-declaration to SAP, license gaps are identified, and then you need to do the true up. Okay, and that's a pretty common scenario that we find across most organizations. And therefore, over time, the license level that you find in organizations is always increasing. There's this always upward trend. Okay, and this is not necessarily the trend that you want to follow, okay? And it causes your maintenance base to increase, okay? We will find the same type of engagement when cloud products are taken on. As you take on certain cloud products, consumption can increase, and the same principles will start to occur, okay? Just that your auditing principles will be based a little bit differently, okay, from a cloud-based perspective, because SAP are now viewing this on an ongoing basis, and they're constantly measuring your usage from the inside and not necessarily from the outside. So one of the things you need to just be aware of, and maybe I'll highlight that at the end as a comment, is the change from on-prem to cloud has a very significant impact from an audit-based perspective. And so you need to be aware of that. And so over time, your annual maintenance fees increase. Okay. What's important about good license management practices is that as you've increased your license usage, in essence, based on allocations, this does not necessarily equal the actual usage. And you can see that difference is indicated here between the license level that you've contracted versus the actual usage based on software asset management tools such as samQ, which actually measure the actual usage based on keystrokes and other factors that you see in the system itself. And therefore, what we found over time for most organizations is that they're situated in this over-license position, where their optimal license position actually is at a much lower level. And that is because the allocation and the housekeeping of their licensing is not as accurate against their contract, and the usage is not accurately measured. And the tools that SAP use for licensing measurement do not actually take into consideration optimal license usage. They just measure that which you allocate. Totally different approach to measurement principles, and therefore that's why we find most organizations are very over licensed in this case, specifically in users, etc. So important to note that. And before we jump into the next slide, which I'm going to jump into now, I just want to jump into, before we jump into the audit preparation, let's run a quick poll with everybody online. It would be great to find out some information. So I'm just going to quickly jump into this and launch the poll. So please feel free to fill in your answers. Do you believe your SAP systems are right-sized for your audit? So we're just going to distribute the poll. And maybe while the poll is distributing, Jaden, maybe if you've got any, you want to jump in here and add any information in, feel free to do so while the poll collects.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we've got about 44% of the vote. Let's try get that up. So if you haven't voted, jump in and vote. Okay, let's give it another 10 seconds and then we'll actually close out the poll. We've got a few polls today. It's interesting to see. Okay, we're going to close out the poll there. We've got almost 60% of people voted here. Let's just close that out. Okay, and so the poll results, let's just share that quickly on the screen. So here you can see that the results of this poll, do you believe your SAP systems are right-sized for your audits? 45% say yes, 55% say no. So it's important for those of you that say no, hey, we offer definite opportunities here to get it right-sized. And even for those who say yes, definitely an opportunity for you to come and check some of the results that we have at other organizations and how we actually help customers get their right sizing correct. Right, let's hide that one and let's jump into another poll. So if you estimate your current license situation, would you say that you are under licensed or over licensed? Just to get a flavor for how people are seeing their system. What does it show them? Okay, so are you think you're over licensed? Do you think you're under licensed? We find in most organizations, while you're filling out this poll, just to give you some feedback, across all the projects that we do, and we do lots of projects, over 100 projects a year with different size organizations, we find that there's this mix. Okay, a lot are in the over license bracket and a lot are in the under license bracket. So those that are in over license brackets, you are paying additional maintenance. You've got a very high maintenance base, and there could have been changes in your organization where you've done restructuring, you've reduced your headcount, okay, or you've had a disbursement of a specific business line of business. Okay, now suddenly you're sitting with a over licensed position. A lot of organizations maybe have taken additional people on and they're growing their business and now they're sitting in under licensed position. So interesting to note here, we've had 44% of the vote. I'm going to stop it there and let's close that poll out. So let's just share that. Hey, 65% say over licensed. That's a very big proportion. 35% say under licensed. So if you're in either of those two categories and you're not in the 10% where you say your licenses are really optimally managed, this is an opportunity for you to correct that. Okay, we have fantastic solutions to do that and services to do that. Right, let's hide the last and let's do the last poll. And let's just have a look at what do you suggest. In your view, what would that percentage be? So let's drill down a little bit further, and this will be the last poll for a little while, and then we'll jump back into the slides. I am cognizant of time and some questions that people may want to ask. So in your view, what is that percentage that you think that you're over licensed by or under licensed by? Good to get an understanding of that, just that value. And I think this is really important for you. Why is it important for you? Because it gives you, it puts into your mind's view, where do you think there is an optimal opportunity to save and to reduce risk? So if you have between 0 and 25% license optimization potential, if you take that 25% of your maintenance base, if you took it at the high end, 25% of your maintenance base, that's a significantly high number. The same for if you're under licensed. You could be at between 25% under license. That's a significant amount of cost that you need to purchase. Okay, so I just closed it out there. Sorry if I've cut it short. We do have time constraints on this side, but I just wanted to share that with you. Interesting to see the numbers from the people who've actually fulfilled that from a poll perspective, and thanks for that. So we've now just shared the poll. I just wanted to give you that quick update, and then we'll hide the poll. And thank you for those who took the time to fill that out. It gives us good information around what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the marketplace, and how can we react to that in a positive way. Right, good. Let's jump back into the audit preparation and what needs to take place in audit preparation. Okay, there are some questions. I see some questions coming through. If you do have questions, I will get to them, and I'll answer some of these questions later on. I do see them there, so thank you for putting your questions in. Let's jump back into the presentation and continue with audit preparation. Okay, so how do you adequately prepare for an audit? Okay, if you sit back and you say, I'm going to get an audit every year, what is the most important perspective? And as a project management, from project management background, planning is always the most important thing. Plan correctly. So get your planning right. Get the contract analysis of your bill of material and your documentation. Know that for which you're licensed for. Know the terms and conditions. Understand the usage rights which you signed for, and understand what you're going to be audited on in terms of the basis of that audit and how you can defend it. This is really important. If you look at your contract, I'm just going to stop here for a second. In your contract, SAP will have written a little line to say you are required to look at these terms and conditions and usage rights. Now, SAP have updated the usage rights over time. You may have selected at a specific point of time a specific set of use rights upon which you base that contract. It's very important that you determine the correct use rights. Okay, this is important for understanding the definitions of users in your user contracts, okay, because it has changed over time. Limited professionals used to be determined by specific use rights at a point in time, and SAP has adjusted that. You need to be aware of that, okay? Understand what you're using, optimize that, and mitigate it as appropriate and as possible, okay? This means use a software asset management tool. Use samQ, it's a great tool. Use it to get around your usage optimization, okay? Understand what's happening in your engines, your indirect, the cloud. Determine what you are really going to be audited for and prepare for that audit, okay? And then importantly, understand what your future demand is. Not only do you need to understand where you are at this point in time, but also work together with your architecture team, your CIO, the people in your organization to determine what do you actually need in the future. Because remember what we showed earlier, you often have to buy more licenses and you get an order from outcoming from an audit. So if you're going to buy more software, you need to be able to negotiate right. Okay, it's not just about compliance, but it's also negotiating that which you really need into the future to meet your organization's requirements from a business model perspective. So if you're changing something in that space, be prepared for it, okay? And then create a real strategy for negotiation. Know who do you need to involve in the audit process, okay? Do you need legal, procurement, which people? If you're not sure and you don't have the competency in your organization, bring in experts that can help you and stick to a plan. So we create a plan and we stick to that plan in terms of the negotiation strategy. So these are important elements you can take away. You can jot them down. We'll share the slides afterwards, but this is preparing for an audit. Okay, this is summarized. Very quick summary of that. I think we've gone through it in enough detail, but if you just want to summarize it into big steps, there are 5 main steps in here that you need to make sure that you are ready for when you go into your audit season. So very important to get those in place. Okay, and then let's go into an SAP licensing summary. I'm going to hand over to Jaden. Jaden, just give me a shout when you want me to click onto the next slide, and I'll click it on through that. So I'll hand it over to you, and you can give some input to these set of slides.
All right, thank you, Rogan. Okay, when we come to SAP Legacy Licensing model, we have two different type of licensing package. One is the package license as well as user license. So package license is actually is allowed customers to use the specific software functionality. So that is package license, right? And user license is to the user to access the user license software. So in order to understand the audit preparation process, so we need to understand what license are subject to audit, all right? So these are the two package license, which is the package license as well as user license, right? So basically that is what two different. Next slide. Okay, when we come to indirect access, so SAP Legacy Licensing model, so you have many application, third-party application that you interact with the SAP application, right? So when you send any document or information or data to SAP ERP, all right? So this is actually a indirect access. Digital access, right? So SAP now actually license all the indirect access on the indirect digital access count. So documents are on the count. How many documents are sending from third-party applications? For example, you are sending a financial document, invoice document or sales document. So all these document types are sent to SAP application, and let's say per annum, give you an example, perhaps maybe 100,000 document count that is sent on from indirect applications to SAP application. So this will be licensed accordingly by SAP on the digital count when SAP do the auditing process, right? So that's the digital count application. Yes. Okay. Next slide.
Okay, and thanks for that, Jaden. And just to summarize, you need to be aware that you need to count the engines, the packages, the users, and you need to do a comparison between the legacy model and the new model in terms of digital access to understand which is the most appropriate financial model for you in the context of indirect access. The old legacy way of measuring indirect access is users and certain engines versus the new way of document count. So just be aware of those two approaches. We help organizations understand those approaches across all their license elements, from the package, the users, and the digital access. Great. Let's just check out SAP Audits in practice. So here's what we're going to look at from a process perspective. So we've talked a bit about process, but the standard audit process from a normal self-declaration and even from an enhanced license audit follows this simplified process. Okay, SAP sends you a measurement request. You perform your customer, you as the customer perform your system measure. You send the measurement data to SAP or you upload it. Okay, SAP auditors review this data and they present findings, and you close out the audit. Okay. Many times there's some negotiation steps between the license audit closing and the audit review and the data findings that happen. This is an opportunity to discuss this with SAP, especially if there are some anomalies or if SAP finds something. So it's important to be aware of this process, and we're going to just jump into the details of this process. So step one, that measurement request. I think we've gone through some of this in detail, but just to highlight, you get your email, you get the measurement instructions around that. As I said earlier, your measurement plan, review the scope of your measurement plan, determine the data in terms of the measurement plan, is it in terms of the data file itself. Make sure that the PDF file represents the contract information correctly if it's a self-determination. Get the self-declaration sheets. These come in PDF format normally, and you're going to fill in the correct measurements on that. Make sure that the metrics are correct against your specific contract. If they're not correct, you need to get that sorted out with SAP. Otherwise, you could be presenting incorrect measurements against different sets of metrics. And very important, look at the support notes that SAP provides to you. These support notes are important because they determine the way in which SAP is going to pull certain measurements out of the systems. And if you have not applied those support notes accurately and correctly and comprehensively, then the measurement outputs that you're going to pull out from the system are going to be incorrect. So very important, you need to spend time applying those support notes. Often within organizations, they have to have a window of opportunity to implement support notes. So be aware of that. It takes time and it takes resources to do that from a basis perspective, and to check that nothing in the support notes has affected your SAP systems from a production perspective. So these are all elements that you need to take in consideration with regards to your plan. How does it work from a system measurement perspective? You'll see that most organizations have multiple production and development systems on the left-hand side here. They create a USMM file, and that USMM file is consolidated in the LAW, the License Audit Workbench, and that creates a License Audit Workbench report. So first of all, make sure that your LAW configuration is correct. Make sure that USMM is run on all systems in scope. So again, it's important to bring through the scope and measure according to that which is in scope. Okay, send the data to the LAW and then do the consolidation using LAW. It consolidates it, and then the law report is produced. Okay, that's important to check that law report, make sure that everything is correct on that before you submit it. And then in the past, you normally would submit this data to SAP via email or by upload now in the SAP for Me system. So there's a process to upload that data in your SAP system already. And then SAP starts reviewing that documentation. So they put it through a review, they review the usage data in the law report, they compare this to your license entitlements. So importantly, you could run a mock license to make sure that it's correct before you submit it. Okay, there are normally conclusions made regarding any license gaps or shortfalls. Okay, notice here that over licensing isn't considered. It's only the gap or the shortfall that is considered. Okay, so this is where you as the customer, you'll get information back in terms of gaps and shortfalls. If there's over licensing, the audit process does not indicate that to you. Okay, and this is where you have you need to be on top of this. You need to make sure. That's why we asked those questions earlier from a poll perspective. You know, are you sure that you are not over licensed? Can you offset things from a licensing perspective when you start this negotiation? Okay, then you'll get the findings sent back to you as a customer. You'll typically find they are summarized in a measurement summary report. This normally comes as a PDF with all the details in it. What's important to note as well, if in your contracts, okay, you have already negotiated specific changes to the standard licensing metrics or any other elements in that contractual change, please make sure that they're always in the measurement summary report. Okay, we see many organizations who have gone ahead with adjustments to the way in which they contracted their SAP packages, and therefore this needs to be represented in the summary report, whether it's in an email that was sent to SAP and agreed on, whether it was actually in a specific section of your contract. Make sure that that information is also contained in the summary report. Okay, why? Because you may change roles in the organization and somebody new takes over, and all of a sudden they don't have this information at hand. At least when it's in the measurement summary report sent to you from SAP, it is there documented, it is there available, and is visible, transparent for anybody who's taking over an audit process into the future. So make sure you bring the information along with you that is valid against your contract and against the license entitlements that you have organized with SAP that are unique. Okay. And then closing processes. Either you don't receive a response from SAP which can happen. Okay, so in other words, SAP just simply accepts your self-declaration and there's no response received. Okay, SAP responds with no license gaps highlighted. They'll send you an email to say, hey, you've got no gaps, everything is fine. Okay, what is important about this, this does not mean that you're compliant. Okay, so you may find that there's no license gaps, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're compliant. Okay, what do we mean by that? Is that just because something maybe wasn't measured or in the measurement plan, that doesn't mean that you're compliant to it. Your usage may be not accurately indicated, and you may find that there are elements that you've missed, okay, and we can help you sort those out as well. And then if there are license gaps identified, you will find that there's a schedule for additional license fees. So they will send you an order form for additional license fees, and or you may be requested to start going through an enhanced license audit. Okay, so some of these are the outcomes that you will find as the outcome of the closing process. Okay, as I mentioned, just because SAP doesn't highlight any license gaps, it doesn't mean that there are none. Okay, it's very important that you understand that. So be aware that if you do have licensing gaps, you need to proactively manage this before your license audit. Okay, if you know that there's a licensing gap, whether it's in indirect access or digital access or in one of the other areas, please don't ignore it and think it's just going to be swept under the carpet. Please proactively manage that. Make sure that you have a strategy to go and negotiate with SAP in this context. Okay, before we go into the next session, we jump in, we're just going to do another quick poll quickly, and these are just last two polls quickly. So let me launch these. Do you believe you're adequately equipped for your audit? So if you had to look in terms of your organization, do you think you have really the right competency sets, the right set of information at your fingertips in order to prepare yourself and to manage an audit end to end? Okay. Interestingly enough, okay, we've got 22% of the vote. The yes side says a lot, the no side says some as well. Okay, let's give people another 20 seconds. Let's see if we can get those votes up, and then I'll share the poll. Okay, let's close out the poll. So we've got a lot of organizations. Let me share this. Most organizations saying yes, which is a good thing. That's good to hear. Some are saying no. So 30% of the organizations are saying no. This does, beg the question. You should get involved. Give us a call. Reach out to us. We can certainly help make sure that you get to the yes side and make sure that you have the right information and are competent to run this for you. Okay, and then last poll for the session, just to keep us in here. Do you have all the relevant contract documentation required to run an audit successfully? And I think this is one of the most challenging places, because what we find in most organizations when we go and interact with them is that this contract document is widely dispersed, or it's been put in folders where you can't get to it and you can't necessarily see it. You may not necessarily understand what was negotiated previously from previous management teams in the organizations. Some of the things haven't been transferred accurately across. So I think this is, especially in very large organizations, this is probably one of the most crucial aspects to maintain, is making sure that you understand and manage your contract documentation accurately. Okay, let's give it another 10 seconds there, and then I'll close the poll and we'll just share it. An interesting spread of results as I'm seeing here as people fill this in. Okay, let's close it out there. And let's share this. Okay, so 33%, 35% say yes, 35% say maybe, and 30% say no. So if we look at this, you've actually got 70%, almost 75%, 65%, sorry, saying that there's maybe a no. So it's interesting to hear. Maybe that's because people are not involved in this. I don't want to read too deeply into the numbers. It all depends on you in your specific organization. But interesting to see that a lot of people have got their contract documentation together, which is really important. And that's a really good positive. So well done for doing that correctly. Okay. Right, we have a few more minutes here to go. And what I just want to take you through is just some preparation steps, and then we'll jump into answering some questions and things like that. So let's jump back to the slide deck. So what are the important elements? And I've just highlighted these. We're not going to jump into every single one of these in detail. We do have, as I mentioned earlier, a set of additional slides after this. And this is going to be our last slide. I'm going to talk through it, and then we'll jump into some questions. But we do have a whole lot of slides that go through each one of these in a lot more detail. And we've decided not to pull those in here. It'll just make our presentation set very, very long. And but they are available to you, so please have a look at them afterwards and give us feedback. It also helps us to see who's really requiring information from this, and to give us some information around that. So first of all, law configuration. Make sure that you've actually configured the law report correctly. Make sure that your USMM and the process to get the law report is accurate. There's no point in pulling out your law report if it's inaccurately configured. Okay, most people think, oh, it's just, this is just something you can just, just grab the law report, run the transaction, SLAW, and everything works correctly. No, it doesn't. If you haven't done your USMM correctly, the output of your USMM into your SLAW will be incorrect. Okay, the systems against which you're pulling the LAW, the SLAW, if you don't have that configured correctly, especially in organizations that have, 30, 40, 50, up to 80, over 100 systems, connected systems, and they may be across multiple diverse landscapes in SAP, some are non-interactive and you need to do a consolidation, it is vital that you get your law configuration correct. Okay, because this is what you're going to send to SAP. If you don't have it right, it's going to create a problem for you. Okay, so first of all, make sure that that law report and the configuration of it is accurate. Secondly, look at the support notes. Determine which support notes you've applied, which notes you haven't applied, which notes you need to apply. Okay, not all notes are applicable. So work through the notes, get your basis and your technical teams to determine that which are the most important priority notes, and look at those notes. Also make sure that you go onto the SAP, in the SAP for Me website, there are information about which notes and which systems aren't being measured correctly at a specific point in time, and SAP are trying to address these. So make sure that those systems are either taken out of scope if there's a specific support note that determines that. Okay, very important to look at those support notes and to make sure that you have them implemented correctly. Then, as I've mentioned before, the measurement scope. Okay, if you have an inaccurate measurement scope, you're going to be providing information that is irrelevant, that may bring you into a non-compliant situation. Make sure you have your measurement scope accurate. If it is not accurate and you find that there are systems or products in place that you've deactivated that you shouldn't be measuring, that should not be part of your measurement scope, you need to go in and correct those. On the measurement plan as well, you might find individuals that's names are listed there from who used to work with the contractual information or was part of the basis team that are no longer working in your organization. Make sure you correct and have the most correct information on your measurement plan. Okay, then classify your users against the use rights definition sets and base this on a actual usage. In other words, use a tool. Okay, if you're just using standard allocations, you may be in a situation where you have got inactive users, you've got multiple logons, you've got individuals who have not been allocated a user license, and in this case, you are going to be in trouble. Okay, because SAP are going to allocate and going to tell you that you end up having to pay a professional license if you have not allocated the user correctly. All right. Review your SAP packages. In other words, determine which is the right packages in terms of the metric types that you've got. Very importantly, look at those package types and determine whether you are still using them, whether they are shelfware, in scope, out of scope, and what are the right metrics and the block types. All of those information that came through from your contract, the bill of material, make sure that that is accurate. If it's not correct, you're going to have a problem. Indirect access. Remember we spoke about it and Jaden spoke about it earlier. 2 points to indirect access. Either you use the legacy side or you use the new digital document counts. You need to do a determination. If you're going to face an enhanced license audit where SAP are going to draw down into your indirect digital access, you need to be aware which is the most optimal licensing structure, and also, do I have negotiation levers on which I can offset my licensing? Okay, and then perform a simulation. Run this as a simulation to get a sense of whether or not you're on track with your licenses. Are there cheaper user license types that you could be using from a simulation perspective? Are there alternative license types? Okay, if you're going to move into the S/4HANA category and if you're going to move into RISE, then you need to use the FUE counts. Okay, and that's a totally different set of principles. So you need to be able to adjust that which you have within your organization to meet the requirements. Jaden, is there anything else you want to add to that? I hope I've covered it comprehensively, but please feel free to jump in and add some additional items that you feel are necessary there.
Yes, there's one thing I like to bring a highlight is that because many SAP customers, when they receive SAP audit report, one of the major what you call the item on the audit report is multiple users. You see, many customers have long lists of multiple users, whether it's a large customer or mid-sized companies. They have many multiple users, and SAP will ask them straight away. They tell the customer, you are under license, you need to buy additional license. So how do you determine whether you are under license? Just based on a multiple users access in your environment. So it is very important. That's why you need to have a tool like VOQUZ samQ assessment tool, which help you to automate the whole process of manage your SAP license better.
Yeah, 100% there, Jaden, and absolutely. Let's just jump into some questions. We've got a few questions here, and I hope this will help also other organizations as we answer them. So the first question here I'm going to answer is a customer made a new contract conversion from ERP, obviously ECC to S/4HANA. Will SAP do a license audit this year, even though they signed a new contract conversion? In some cases, and in most cases, there are a few things to consider here. One, are you in the transition of actually doing a transformation project, a migration project from ECC, even though you signed a new contract? Okay, depends on where you are in that transformation. Some customers, let me give you some examples. Some customers have signed an S/4HANA contract, but they're going to be using their ECC for the next 3 years and then planning their migration. In that case, you may be licensed, do you have your normal standard license audits? Okay, it also depends on what your procurement team has negotiated at the time of signing a license conversion contract with SAP. Sometimes SAP are lenient and say, okay, we won't audit you for the next 3 years. It may be that, especially if you're in the position of transition and you're moving from ECC to S/4HANA and you're moving across, that they then won't perform those audits. Okay, it all depends on what you've actually negotiated with SAP. If there is nothing in paper and there's nothing negotiated during that point in the audit, then SAP can still come back to you and do your audit. It also depends on what system you're in. So as I say, some customers sign a contract, but they delay that move for various reasons. They want to get the benefit of the contract, but they don't want to move yet. And we see lots of that happening in the organization. So in the market space. I hope that answers your question. And it goes there. Okay, so they'll go live. You guys are going to go live in the 1st of of Jan 2024. So you're actually in transition. It's unlikely. That would be my view of it. Because why? You're actually doing a whole lot of developments. Okay, one thing to be important to note about this is that if you, and I've seen this from other customers, in their transition process, just to be aware, they often have to bring on some additional developers. Maybe we should take this offline. I'm just thinking, and I can share some things with you. Maybe reach out to me directly, and I can share some direct findings with you around that. So you'll see my email address in the later stage, or Jaden's. Just drop us an email, and I'd like to share some just some customer findings in terms of what we've seen in other customers taking place in terms of their transition. In order to keep on track, okay, I'm over licensed. How can I rectify the situation? Okay, first of all, you need to understand for what you're over licensed for. Is it users? Is it engines? Where is your shelfware sitting? Okay, and then what we can do to help you is get you to the right value of that over licensed position, and then start a negotiation approach with SAP. Okay, so we can help you with that. Reach out to us. I can share again, myself, Jaden, and some of our other executives can share with you how do we get people from an over licensed position into a right-sized license position. It depends on your future demand. There are lots of different parameters we need to look at. Do you need other products? Do we need to offset things? Are you going to do a contract conversion? Are you in a specific space? Where are you going to with your SAP journey? Are they a strategic vendor? Are they not? There's many questions I need to understand from your specific unique position in order to give you the keys to unlock that unlicensed position that you're in. Okay. Digital access license. How do we know to not pay for digital access license? Again, two important elements here. Digital access, you have two options. You either go through the indirect approach where you use users, and if you've got two engines, your sales and service order engine, your procurement order engine, and NetWeaver Open Hub, though that's one approach, and you need to compare that approach financially to your document count approach. And we do a lot of projects to help customers understand that. Also know that at the end of this year, SAP are going to probably take away the DAAP program. For those of you not aware, it's been running for 3 years. It's the Digital Access Adoption Program, and you need to be aware of that. So we can help you understand what is the best financial approach for you, legacy or new model, okay? Yeah, I understand where you're coming from when you say the SAP community has not been powerful enough to force a more customer-friendly approach to optimizing the licenses. We're finding that is changing, and there are the DACH SAP user group DSUG has enforced certain things. Let's discuss this if you want to. Yeah. Okay, when a person leaves a company, how long does the user ID keep? Well, that'll keep running until you deactivate them. So if you don't inactivate, if I can put it that way, the user license from an individual, even though they're terminated, they're still then consuming a user license from your inventory. That's really important. So one of the things that we run with lots of organizations is this inactivity report. If you don't know what your inactivity is from a user-based perspective, then you are still consuming licenses in your inventory when these could be put back into the inventory and either used by other individuals or offset as shelfware. So it's very important you understand your licensing structure from a user-based perspective. Many organizations get caught up from an audit perspective in inactivity, and they either don't terminate them after 30, 60, 90, or 180 days, or even 360 days. But it also is based on your business principles or processes. So please be aware, inactive usage and multiple logons can run you into problems with SAP audits. Okay, so it's important to get that understanding there. Right, we are absolutely on time. I'm probably a little bit over time. So if there are any more questions, please give us a shout. I'm just going to click to the next page for you. So for those of you who want to get in touch with us, my email address is there. Jaden's email address is there. We have some more really great webinars coming up next month, specifically around RISE and automating the RISE contract. Our tooling does RISE contracting in an automated way. So please jump on that webinar. Very happy to answer other questions. HANA runtime audit, yes, please, won't you drop me a line on the HANA runtime audit, and I'll answer that. If you've got specific on that, I can share that information with you in terms of what to do from a HANA runtime audit or an enterprise runtime audit. I can share some information with you there. I see that in the question box as well. Good, we are absolutely on the hour. So to come back, the database auditing side, certainly we can help you with that. It depends on what type of databases you're running, whether it's Sybase or HANA or any of the others, memory type sizing, etc. Whether it's and there's specific terms in the databasing sizing that I can give you to go and look at, and specific blogs that have been written and elements to look at from a HANA runtime audit side. But let's close it out there. I just want to guys again say thank you very much. Thank you, Jaden, for joining me today, and for the rest of the team who joined us. And let's close that out. And if there are any other questions, there are email addresses. Reach out to us. This will be loaded on our website. You can review the presentation as well as the webinar recording. And we look forward to seeing you in our next webinars. Great. Thank you, everyone.
You all. Yeah, thank you all. Yeah.
Have a great rest of your day and enjoy it. Cheers then. Bye-bye.